The summer of 1952 painted Willowbrook Heights in perfect pastels. Manicured lawns stretched like green carpets between colonial houses with white picket fences, while chrome-bumpered Buicks and Oldsmobiles sat gleaming in circular driveways. American flags hung motionless from maple trees, and the scent of barbecue smoke drifted through screen doors where families gathered around new television sets, watching Milton Berle and dreaming the American dream. But beneath this picture-perfect facade, shadows gathered in the Tudor mansion at the end of Elm Street, where the Dane family had once been the pride of the neighborhood. Harry Dane had been everything. A 1,950 seconds. Patriarch should be a successful insurance executive, with silver temples, a firm handshake, and a reputation for integrity that extended from the country club to the church vestry. He'd built his empire selling security to a nation hungry for stability after the war, promising peace of mind to families who'd lived through too much uncertainty. His sudden death from a heart attack at 52 had shocked the community, leaving behind a sprawling house, a thriving business, and a family struggling to maintain appearances. The funeral had been a showcase of suburban respectability. Black Cadillacs lined the street like a procession of beetles, while neighbors brought casseroles and whispered condolences behind gloved hands. Clara Dane, Harry's widow, had stood at the graveside in her finest black dress and Jackie Kennedy pearls, accepting sympathy with the grace expected of a woman of her station. The whole neighborhood had attended, including Harold Dane, Harry's younger brother, who'd stepped in to handle the business affairs with remarkable efficiency. Now, 6 weeks later, the same black Cadillacs returned to Elm Street, but this time for a wedding. Young Hamilton Dane stood at his bedroom window, still wearing his army dress uniform from the ceremony, watching the reception unfold on the back lawn below. Paper lanterns swayed between oak trees, and a small orchestra played gentle waltzes while guests in summer suits and flowing dresses celebrated his mother's remarriage to his uncle. The scene looked like something from a magazine spread about successful American families, prosperous, harmonious, enviably normal. But Hamilton saw only betrayal dressed in wedding lace. At 26, he carried the war in his shoulders, a slight stoop that spoke of too many nights in European foxholes, and eyes that had seen too much for someone who should have been worrying about career prospects and finding a nice girl to marry. He'd returned from Korea 3 months ago to find his world rearranged like furniture in a house he no longer recognized. His father, dead. His mother, remarried. His uncle Harold, now both stepfather and the new president of Dane and Associates Insurance. The speed of it all left him breathless, as if he'd been caught in an undertow that pulled him away from shore while he wasn't paying attention. A gentle knock interrupted Hamilton's brooding. "Ham? You decent?" The voice belonged to Paul Landis, his childhood friend who now worked as a junior associate at his father's now uncle's insurance firm. Paul entered carrying 2 highball glasses, his bow tie loosened and jacket slung over his shoulder. "Thought you might need this," Paul said, offering one of the glasses. Through the window, they could see Harold and Clara dancing, her white cocktail dress spinning as neighbors applauded their picture-perfect romance. Hamilton accepted the drink but didn't sip it. 6 weeks, Paul. 6 weeks from funeral to wedding bells. What does that tell you about the grieving process in suburban America? Paul shifted uncomfortably, his young face creased with concern. At 24, he still carried the optimism that the war hadn't quite beaten out of Hamilton. "Your mother's been through hell, Ham. Maybe she just needs someone to what? Replace my father before his grave marker's even set." Hamilton's voice carried the edge of a man who'd learned to speak quietly in dangerous places. "Harold's been remarkably helpful, hasn't he? Stepping in so smoothly, handling the business, comforting the widow. Makes you wonder if he'd been rehearsing for the role." The reception continued below them like a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Women in pastel dresses clustered around the punch bowl, their laughter tinkling like wind chimes. Men in summer suits discussed business prospects and the new Eisenhower administration, while children in their Sunday best chased fireflies across the lawn. The whole scene radiated the prosperity and contentment that America had promised itself after the war. But Hamilton saw theater, not truth. "You're talking about your own family," Paul whispered, glancing toward the door. "Your uncle's a good man. Everyone says so. Everyone said my father died of natural causes, too." Hamilton finally took a sip of his drink, the whiskey burning like the suspicions he'd been nursing since his return. Funny how convenient heart attacks can be for ambitious brothers. Paul's face went pale in the lamplight. That's a serious accusation, Ham. You can't just— Can't what? Ask questions? Wonder why a healthy man drops dead just when his brother's been pushing for more control of the company? Hamilton moved away from the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. I've been gone 2 years, Paul. 2 years of fighting in mud and snow while my family rearranged itself like pieces on a chessboard. Now I come home to find the king is dead, and someone else is wearing the crown. The music from below shifted to Some Enchanted Evening, and Hamilton watched his mother dance with Harold, their movements synchronized like they'd been practicing. Clara looked radiant in a way he hadn't seen since before the war, her face glowing with happiness that seemed genuine. But happiness built on what foundation? As the evening wore on, the reception began to wind down. Guests departed in their gleaming automobiles, headlights cutting through the summer darkness as they returned to their own perfect houses on perfectly manicured streets. Hamilton had retreated to his father's study, seeking solace among the familiar mahogany furniture and leather-bound books that still smelled of pipe tobacco and Old Spice cologne. The study remained exactly as Harry Dane had left it, his fountain pen still lying beside an unfinished letter, his reading glasses folded on top of the evening paper dated the day he died. Even his coffee cup sat on the desk, a brown ring staining the wood where Clara hadn't had the heart to move it. The room felt like a shrine to interrupted ambition, a life cut short just as it was reaching its prime. Hamilton poured himself another whiskey from his father's crystal decanter and settled into the familiar leather chair behind the massive desk. Outside, the last of the party cleanup was finishing caterers loading equipment into white vans, while Harold directed the removal of rented tables and chairs with the efficiency of a man comfortable with authority. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight, its deep bronze notes echoing through the silent house. Clara and Harold had retired upstairs an hour ago, leaving Hamilton alone with his doubts and the lingering scent of wedding cake and champagne. That's when he saw the figure in the garden. At first, it seemed like a trick of moonlight, a shadow that moved wrong, too solid to be cast by swaying tree branches. But as Hamilton's eyes adjusted to the darkness beyond the French doors, the shape resolved into something impossible, his father, standing beneath the old oak tree where he'd once pushed Hamilton on a tire swing. The figure wore Harry Dane's favorite gray suit, the one Clara had buried him in, but there was something ethereal about his presence, as if he were made of smoke and memory rather than flesh and bone. His face, once ruddy with health and optimism, now appeared pale and serious, marked by knowledge that the living shouldn't possess. Hamilton's hand trembled as he set down his glass, whiskey sloshing onto his father's desk blotter. He blinked hard, certain that alcohol and grief were conspiring to create this vision. But when he opened his eyes, the figure remained, now beckoning with one translucent hand toward the garden gate that led to the wooded path behind the property. Without conscious thought, Hamilton found himself moving toward the French doors, his heart pounding like artillery fire. The rational part of his mind, the part trained by war to distinguish between reality and shell-shocked hallucination, screamed warnings. But a deeper instinct, perhaps the same one that had kept him alive in Korea, told him to follow. The summer air felt thick and electric as he stepped onto the flagstone patio, crickets falling silent at his approach. The figure of his father waited at the garden's edge, more solid now, more undeniably real. When their eyes met across the darkness, Hamilton saw pain and urgency in that familiar gaze, the same expression Harry Dane had worn when discussing serious business matters or disciplining his son for childhood transgressions. But this was no childhood prank requiring correction. This was something far more serious, something that demanded justice in a world where justice had been buried beneath 6 feet of earth and 6 weeks of convenient forgetting. The specter raised one finger to his lips in a gesture Hamilton remembered from countless bedtime stories, then turned and glided toward the wooded path with movements that defied the laws of physics and suburban propriety alike. Hamilton followed, leaving behind the safety of electric lights and rational explanations, stepping into a darkness that promised answers and perhaps truths too terrible for the daylight world of Willowbrook Heights to contain. The wooded path behind the Dane property stretched into darkness like a tunnel leading away from the civilized world of Willowbrook Heights. Ancient oaks and maples formed a canopy overhead, their branches filtering moonlight into silver coins that danced across the forest floor. Here, beyond the reach of street lamps and porch lights, The suburban facade fell away to reveal something older, wilder, and infinitely more honest than the manicured lawns and picture windows of the neighborhood. Hamilton followed the spectral figure deeper into the woods, his dress shoes crunching on dead leaves from seasons past. The sounds of the civilized world, distant traffic, air conditioning units, television sets flickering behind curtained windows faded until only the whisper of wind through branches and the rapid beating of his own heart remained. The ghost of Harry Dane moved with purpose, leading his son to a small clearing where moonlight fell unobstructed onto a fallen log that had served as their secret meeting place during Hamilton's childhood. Here, father and son had once discussed everything from baseball statistics to the mysteries of growing up. Now, they would discuss murder. The specter turned to face his son, and in the silver light, Harry Dane's features became heartbreakingly clear. The same kind eyes, the same gentle smile, the same receding hairline that Hamilton had inherited. But there was a weight to his presence now, a gravity that spoke of unfinished business, and secrets that demanded telling. Hamilton, the ghost spoke, and its voice carried the sound of wind through empty houses, of promises broken and trust betrayed. My boy, you've grown thin. The war changed you. Hamilton's throat felt dry as desert sand. Dad, is it? Are you really? As real as the lies they tell about my death. Harry's ghost stepped closer, and Hamilton caught the familiar scent of pipe tobacco and aftershave, impossibly present in this impossible moment. Listen well, son, for dawn approaches, and with it, I must return to the shadows where the wronged dead wander. The clearing seemed to shrink around them, the trees leaning inward like conspirators sharing secrets. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the half-hour 12:30 in the morning, the dead time when the boundary between worlds grew thin. They say you died of a heart attack, Hamilton whispered, his soldier's instincts finally accepting what his rational mind rejected. Natural causes. The stress of business, Mother said. Harold said many things, all of them carefully chosen. The ghost's expression darkened, shadows pooling in the hollows of his cheeks like bruises. Your uncle is a gifted speaker, Hamilton. He speaks of duty and family loyalty, of stepping up in times of crisis. He speaks of love conquering grief, of moving forward rather than dwelling in the past. But he does not speak of poison. The word hung in the air between them like smoke from a funeral pyre. Hamilton felt the ground shift beneath his feet, as if the very earth were rejecting this revelation. Poison? The word came out as barely a breath. Harry's ghost nodded slowly, sadly. In my evening brandy, administered over weeks with the patience of a man who understood that sudden death raises questions, while gradual illness raises only sympathy, the specter's form flickered like candlelight in wind. Your uncle studied me, Hamilton. He learned my habits, my routines, my weaknesses. He courted your mother with flowers and sympathy even as he measured me for a coffin. Hamilton's hands clenched into fists, his body responding with the controlled violence he'd learned in combat. That son of a bitch. That goddamned language son, Harry's ghost said gently, a echo of countless childhood corrections. Even in death, we maintain our standards. The ghost continued, his form growing more substantial as the tale unfolded, as if the telling itself gave him strength. Harold visited every evening for months before my death, always with some business matter to discuss, always staying for a brandy in the study. He'd bring documents to review, insurance policies to examine, contracts that required my signature. Such a devoted brother, your mother thought. Such dedication to the family business. Hamilton watched his father's specter pace the small clearing, dead leaves crunching beneath feet that should have made no sound. The suburban world of barbecues and bridge clubs seemed impossibly distant from this midnight revelation among the trees. Each night, he added a small amount of digitalis to my drink, a heart medication, ironically enough. In small doses, therapeutic. In accumulating doses over time, lethal. Your uncle had done his research, Hamilton. He knew exactly how much, how often, how to make it appear like natural cardiac failure. The ghost's voice carried the bitter wisdom of the betrayed. Even the family doctor, Dr. Pemberton, saw nothing suspicious in my symptoms. Fatigue, occasional chest pains, shortness of breath, all perfectly normal for a middle-aged businessman under stress. Hamilton's military training kicked in, analyzing the strategy with cold professional appreciation, even as his heart burned with rage. Clever, patient, no sudden changes to arouse suspicion. Harold always was the patient one, Harry's ghost agreed. While I charged ahead with expansion plans and new ventures, he watched and waited, learning my weaknesses, studying my patterns. He knew I took my evening brandy alone in the study while reviewing the day's business. He knew your mother retired early with her romance novels and sleeping pills. He knew you were overseas, unable to witness the gradual decline. The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop several degrees, and Hamilton's breath began to mist in the suddenly frigid air. The supernatural cold that surrounded his father's spirit felt more real than the warm summer night beyond the trees. But why? Hamilton asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The business was profitable enough for both of you. Mother loved you. You had everything a man could want in 1950 seconds America. Everything Harold wanted, the ghost corrected. The house on Elm Street that our grandfather built. The company our father started. The respect of the community, the deference of employees, the love of a beautiful woman. Harold spent his life watching me receive everything he felt should have been his by right as the elder brother. Hamilton frowned. But you're the older. By 3 minutes, Harry's ghost said sadly. Twin brothers, Hamilton, born in the same hour on the same October night in 1900. But I emerged first, making me the heir according to our father's old-world thinking. Harold never forgave those 3 minutes that determined our destinies. The revelation struck Hamilton like shrapnel. Twin brothers, he'd never known, had never been told about the circumstances of his father's birth. In the world of Willowbrook Heights, such details mattered less than success and respectability, but apparently they had mattered enough to Harold to kill for them. Your mother doesn't know, the ghost continued. To her, Harold is the grieving brother who stepped up in her hour of need. She sees kindness where there is calculation, love where there is possession. He's courted her with the same patience he used to murder me flowers every day, gentle comfort, practical assistance with finances and legal matters. Who could blame a widow for falling in love with such devotion? Hamilton thought of his mother dancing with Harold at the reception, her face glowing with happiness. How do you tell a woman that her new husband murdered her first one? How do you destroy the foundation of someone's newfound joy with accusations that sound like madness? What do you want me to do? Hamilton asked, though his soldier's heart already knew the answer. The ghost of Harry Dane fixed his son with a gaze that seemed to burn despite its ethereal nature. Justice. Hamilton. Proof. Revenge served with the same cold patience Harold used to serve me poison. The specter's form began to flicker as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. But be careful, my boy. Harold is not the simple suburban businessman he appears to be. He's a killer who's gotten away with the perfect crime. He won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens his new life. The eastern horizon began to blush with the faint promise of sunrise, and Harry's ghost grew more translucent with each passing moment, like morning mist burning away before the sun. The supernatural cold that had surrounded them began to dissipate, replaced by the natural warmth of a summer dawn in suburbia. I haven't much time left, the specter said urgently, his voice becoming fainter, more distant. The daylight world calls the dead back to their proper realm. But remember this, Hamilton looked for the digitalis. Harold was careful, but not perfect. Somewhere in his house, in his office, in his medicine cabinet, you'll find traces of what he used. The poison may be gone, but containers leave residue. Evidence waits for those who know where to look. Hamilton stepped closer, desperate to hold on to this moment, this impossible conversation with his murdered father. How will I know? How can I be certain it's not just grief making me see what I want to see? The ghost smiled sadly, the expression achingly familiar despite its ethereal nature. Because you're my son, Hamilton. You have my sense of justice and your mother's intuition for truth. Trust what you feel in your bones, but verify with what you can prove in court. Harold's confidence will be his weakness. He believes his secret died with me. A robin's song pierced the dawn quiet, followed by another, then another, as the woodland creatures began their daily chorus. Somewhere in the distance, milk trucks began their routes through Willowbrook Heights, delivering fresh bottles to doorsteps where families would soon wake to another perfect day in suburban paradise. Watch him carefully, Harry's ghost continued, now barely visible in the growing light. Study his habits, his reactions, his tells. Harold always touched his temple when he lied, a nervous gesture from childhood that he never outgrew. He'll give himself away if you know what to look for. The specter reached out as if to touch his son's face, but his hand passed through Hamilton's cheek like cool air. I'm proud of who you've become, son. The war changed you, yes, but it also strengthened you. You'll need that strength for what comes next. Harold won't go quietly to justice. He's tasted power and found it to his liking. Hamilton felt tears he hadn't shed since childhood threatening to overwhelm him. I won't let you down, Dad. I'll make him pay for what he did. Justice, not revenge. Harry's ghost corrected gently. There's a difference, Hamilton. Revenge destroys the avenger along with the guilty. Justice restores balance to a world thrown into chaos. Be better than your uncle, be the man I raised you to be. The sun broke free of the horizon, sending golden shafts through the forest canopy, and Harry Dane's ghost began to fade like a photograph left too long in sunlight. His final words came as whispers on the morning breeze. Remember me, Hamilton. Remember the truth. And beware. Harold has killed once for what he wanted. He won't hesitate to kill again to keep it. Then he was gone, leaving only the scent of pipe tobacco lingering in the summer air and the weight of terrible knowledge pressing down on Hamilton's shoulders like a pack full of ammunition. Hamilton stood alone in the clearing as full daylight transformed the mysterious woodland back into just another grove of trees behind a suburban neighborhood. Birds sang their morning songs, squirrels chattered in the branches, and somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower started up as an early rising neighbor began his weekend yard work. The normal world reasserted itself with relentless cheerfulness, but Hamilton carried darkness within him, now the knowledge that evil could wear a three-piece suit and serve poison with a smile. That murder could be committed with boardroom efficiency and covered up with community sympathy. He walked back through the garden toward the house on Elm Street, where his mother and murderous uncle slept peacefully in the master bedroom that had once belonged to his parents. The Tudor mansion looked exactly as it had the night before, solid, respectable, the very picture of American prosperity. But Hamilton saw it differently now, saw it as a crime scene dressed up in wedding decorations and fresh paint. Harold Dane thought he'd gotten away with the perfect murder. He thought his secret was safe, buried with his brother's body in Willowbrook Cemetery. But secrets, Hamilton had learned in the war, had a way of surfacing when you least expected them, like landmines waiting for the wrong footstep. And Hamilton intended to provide that footstep. 3 days after his midnight encounter with his father's ghost, Hamilton sat in Mel's diner on the edge of Willowbrook Heights, nursing black coffee and watching the morning rush of suburban commuters through the chrome-framed window. Men in gray flannel suits hurried toward the train station with leather briefcases and folded newspapers, while their wives in house dresses waved goodbye from station wagon windows before returning to their spotless kitchens and well-appointed homes. The normalcy of it all felt like sandpaper against his raw nerves. Paul Landis slid into the red vinyl booth across from him, carrying his own coffee and a concerned expression that had become his permanent fixture since the wedding reception. You look like hell, Ham. When's the last time you slept? Hamilton glanced at his reflection in the diner's mirror behind the counter, hollow cheeks, bloodshot eyes, the haunted look of a man carrying secrets too heavy for daylight conversation. Sleep's overrated. How's business at the office? Busy. Your Uncle Harold, he's been making changes, new policies, new procedures. Some of the older employees aren't too happy about it, but he's bringing in more revenue than we've seen in years. Paul stirred sugar into his coffee with mechanical precision. He's asked about you several times, wants to know when you're planning to join the firm. The family insurance business had always been Hamilton's expected destiny, following in his father's footsteps, learning the trade, eventually taking over when Harry retired. Now the thought of working under Harold, of shaking hands with his father's murderer every morning, made Hamilton's stomach turn. I need more time, Hamilton said, watching a young father help his daughter out of a powder blue Chevrolet across the street. The war. Readjustment is harder than people think. Paul nodded sympathetically. Everyone understands, Ham. Take all the time you need. Harold's been very patient, very understanding about the whole situation. I bet he has. Hamilton's voice carried an edge that made Paul look up sharply. What's that supposed to mean? Hamilton studied his childhood friend's earnest face. Paul, who'd never seen combat, never learned to recognize the subtle signs of deception that kept soldiers alive. How could he explain that patience and understanding could be weapons as deadly as poison when wielded by the right person? Nothing. Just tired, like you said. Hamilton forced a smile and changed the subject. Tell me about the Willowbrook Community Theater. Are they still doing their summer productions? Paul blinked at the apparent non sequitur. Sure, every August. Mrs. Henderson runs it like a military operation. This year, they're doing some melodrama about a scheming businessman who murders his partner. Why? Hamilton's pulse quickened. Interesting choice. Who's directing? Mrs. Henderson herself. She's been trying to get Harold to sponsor it. Good publicity for the business, she says. Community involvement, civic responsibility, all that. Paul took a sip of his coffee. You thinking about getting involved? Might be good for you, something to keep your mind occupied. Maybe. Hamilton's mind raced with possibilities. If he could convince Mrs. Henderson to modify the play slightly, to make it mirror Harold's crime more closely, he could watch his uncle's reaction. Look for those tells his father had mentioned. The guilty conscience was a powerful thing. It made people reveal themselves in unguarded moments. Actually, Paul, I think community theater might be exactly what I need right now. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Harold Dane himself walked in, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit and silk tie, looking every inch the successful businessman. At 45, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd achieved everything he'd ever wanted: the business, the house, the beautiful wife. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, his smile warm and genuine as he spotted them in the booth. Hamilton! Paul! Harold approached with outstretched arms, radiating the bonhomie of suburban success. What a pleasant surprise. May I join you? Hamilton forced himself to remain seated as his uncle slid into the booth beside Paul, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and the aura of prosperity. This close, Hamilton could study the man who'd murdered his father, looking for cracks in the facade. Signs of guilt, evidence of the monster hiding beneath the respectable exterior. You look better, Hamilton, Harold said with apparent concern. More rested. Your mother's been worried about you since the reception. You seemed distant. Wedding receptions can be overwhelming, Hamilton replied carefully. So much emotion, so many changes to process. Harold's hand moved to his temple, just a brief touch, so quick that Paul missed it entirely. But Hamilton caught it, and his father's words echoed in his memory. Harold always touched his temple when he lied. Of course, perfectly understandable. Harold's voice oozed sympathy. Your mother and I want you to know that nothing has to change between us. I'm not trying to replace your father, Hamilton. I'm just trying to help your family through a difficult time. Another temple touch. Harold ordered coffee and apple pie from the waitress, a motherly woman in a pink uniform who clearly recognized him as one of Willowbrook Heights' most successful residents. He chatted easily with her about her grandson's Little League team and the upcoming church bazaar, displaying the kind of effortless charm that made him beloved throughout the community. But Hamilton watched his uncle's reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser, studying the micro-expressions that flickered across his face when he thought no one was looking. There was a calculation behind Harold's warm smile, a constant assessment of how his words and gestures were being received. Everything was performance, carefully calibrated to maintain his image as the grieving brother who'd stepped up to help his family. I've been thinking about the business, Uncle Harold, Hamilton said casually, noting how his uncle's posture straightened at the word, uncle another tell. Perhaps, or simply discomfort at the formal distance the title implied. Have you? That's wonderful news, Hamilton. Your father always hoped you'd join the firm after your military service. Harold's eyes brightened with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm. We could start you in client relations, let you learn the ropes gradually. No pressure, of course. Actually, I was thinking about something more creative. Paul mentioned the community theater needs a sponsor this summer. Hamilton stirred his coffee slowly, watching Harold's reaction. Might be good publicity for Dane and Associates. Show our community involvement. Harold's temple touched again, so briefly that Hamilton almost missed it. Theater? I hadn't really considered. What sort of production are they doing? A melodrama, Paul offered helpfully. Something about business partners and betrayal. Mrs. Henderson thinks it'll be quite dramatic. The color drained slightly from Harold's face, though he covered it quickly with another charming smile. Melodrama. How quaint. Though I'm not sure it's quite the image we want to project for the firm. Perhaps something more uplifting? A musical comedy, perhaps? Hamilton leaned forward slightly. But don't you think people enjoy a good mystery, Uncle Harold? Something that explores the darker side of human nature? The kinds of secrets people keep hidden beneath respectable facades? Harold's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down, the small sound like a gunshot in the quiet diner. I suppose there's an audience for that sort of thing. Though personally, I prefer entertainment that brings people together rather than dwelling on unpleasant possibilities. Unpleasant possibilities, Hamilton repeated. Like what kinds of things? Oh, you know. Harold waved his hand dismissively, but Hamilton noticed the slight tremor in his fingers. Murder plots, betrayal, that sort of sensationalism. People come to the theater to escape their worries, not to be reminded of all the terrible things that could happen. The bell above the door chimed again, and Clara Dane entered the diner wearing a powder blue dress that complemented her newly styled hair. She looked radiant, younger somehow, as if marriage had restored a vitality that widowhood had temporarily dimmed. Her face lit up when she spotted them in the booth. "What a lovely surprise!" she exclaimed, hurrying over with the enthusiasm of a woman genuinely happy to see her family together. "Harold, darling, you didn't tell me you were meeting the boys for coffee." "Spontaneous encounter, my dear," Harold said, rising to kiss his wife's cheek. "Hamilton was just telling us about his interest in community theater." Clara's eyes brightened as she slid into the booth beside her son. "Oh, Hamilton, that's wonderful. You always loved drama in school. Remember when you played Romeo in your senior year? You were magnificent." The irony wasn't lost on Hamilton Romeo, another young man, driven to desperate measures by family conflict and untimely death. "I was thinking more about directing than acting, Mother. Maybe producing." "Harold could help with that," Clara said, reaching across to squeeze her new husband's hand. "He's so good with people, so organized. You two could work together on it." Harold's smile seemed frozen in place, like a mask that was beginning to slip. "I'm sure Hamilton has his own vision for the project, dear. Young men need to establish their independence." Another temple touch, more pronounced this time. Hamilton filed away the observation, adding it to his growing catalog of Harold's unconscious tells. His uncle was definitely uncomfortable with the theater idea, which meant Hamilton was on the right track. "Actually, I'd love your input, Uncle Harold," Hamilton said with false sincerity, "especially on the business aspects of the production. You understand finances better than anyone." "I suppose I could review the budget," Harold said reluctantly. "Make sure the numbers add up properly." "Perfect. And maybe you could even read the script, give us your thoughts on the story. After all, you understand human psychology so well. What motivates people to do terrible things for personal gain?" Harold's coffee cup clattered again as his hand shook visibly. "I'm sure Mrs. Henderson has everything well in hand. She's been directing for years." Clara looked back and forth between them, sensing undercurrents she couldn't quite identify. "Is everything all right? You both seem a bit tense." "Just excited about the project, Mother," Hamilton said smoothly. "Nothing brings out passion like good theater." The waitress returned to refill their coffee cups, her practiced movements creating a brief distraction that allowed each person at the table to collect themselves. Clara dabbed her lips with a napkin and checked her appearance in her compact mirror. Harold straightened his tie and glanced at his gold wristwatch. And Paul fidgeted with his coffee spoon like a man uncomfortable with family tensions he couldn't understand. Hamilton used the moment to study his mother more carefully. Marriage to Harold had clearly agreed with her. She'd gained back the weight she'd lost during her grief. Her skin had regained its healthy glow. And there was a contentment in her posture that he hadn't seen since before his father's death. She looked like a woman who'd found her way back to happiness after a dark period. It would destroy her to learn the truth. "You know," Clara said suddenly, "your father loved the theater. Did you know that, Hamilton? Before we were married, before the responsibilities of business took over, Harry had dreams of being an actor. He even auditioned for a few productions in the city." Harold's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Did he? I never knew that about my brother." "Oh yes, he had quite the dramatic flair." Clara's eyes took on a dreamy quality as she remembered. "He used to practice his speeches in front of the bedroom mirror, striking poses and projecting his voice. I'd tease him about being a ham, but secretly I found it quite romantic." "What kind of plays did he audition for?" Hamilton asked, genuinely curious about this side of his father he'd never known. Mostly Shakespeare, if I remember correctly. He had a particular fondness for the tragedies: Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear. He said they contained all the essential truths about human nature. Clara smiled at the memory. He especially loved the soliloquies, those moments when characters revealed their deepest thoughts and fears to the audience. Harold's temple touch was becoming more frequent, and Hamilton noticed a thin sheen of perspiration on his uncle's forehead despite the diner's air conditioning. The conversation about theater was clearly making him nervous, which only reinforced Hamilton's conviction that his plan was sound. Maybe we should incorporate some Shakespeare into the community production, Hamilton suggested. Elevate it beyond simple melodrama, give it some classical weight. That might be too ambitious for a community theater, Harold said quickly. Shakespeare requires trained actors, sophisticated audiences. Willowbrook Heights is more of a light entertainment kind of community. Are you suggesting our neighbors lack sophistication, Uncle Harold? Hamilton's tone was mild, but there was steel beneath the surface. I think you'd be surprised what people can appreciate when it's presented properly. Clara clapped her hands together with delight. Oh, Hamilton, you should definitely talk to Mrs. Henderson about adding Shakespeare. Imagine how proud your father would be to know his son was bringing serious drama to Willowbrook Heights. Harold flinched as if slapped, the reaction so pronounced that even Paul noticed and frowned with concern. Are you feeling all right, Mr. Dane? You look a bit pale. Just a touch of indigestion, Harold said, forcing another smile. Too much coffee on an empty stomach. But Hamilton saw the truth in his uncle's eyes, not indigestion, but the corrosive effects of guilt eating away at a man's peace of mind. Harold was remembering Harry's love of theater, perhaps imagining his dead brother's ghost watching from the audience as his own crimes were reenacted on stage. Well, I should let you boys get back to your business discussion, Clara said, gathering her purse and standing. Harold, don't forget we have dinner with the Millers tonight. And Hamilton, I do hope you'll come by the house soon. It feels strange having you stay at the hotel when your old room is sitting empty. Hamilton stood to kiss his mother's cheek, inhaling her familiar scent of Chanel No. 5 and face powder. Soon, Mother, I just need a little more time to sort things out. Of course, darling. Take all the time you need. She squeezed his hand warmly, then leaned down to kiss Harold goodbye. I'll see you at home, sweetheart. After Clara left, the three men sat in uncomfortable silence for several moments. Outside, the lunch crowd was beginning to arrive: secretaries from the nearby office buildings, construction workers from a housing development going up on the outskirts of town, mothers with small children who needed a break from domestic routine. Hamilton, Harold said finally, his voice carefully controlled, I hope you're not planning anything that might upset your mother. She's been through enough trauma this year. What could possibly upset her about community theater, Uncle Harold? Hamilton met his uncle's gaze directly. Unless you think there's something dangerous about exploring themes of guilt and justice on stage? Harold's hand went to his temple one more time, and this time he caught himself doing it, dropping his arm quickly to his lap. Just be careful, nephew. Theater has a way of bringing out people's emotions, making them see things that aren't really there. Sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie. Sleeping dogs? Hamilton repeated. Interesting phrase. Though I've always found that sleeping dogs eventually wake up, Uncle Harold. And when they do, they tend to be quite hungry. The two men stared at each other across the diner table, and Paul looked back and forth between them like a spectator at a tennis match who couldn't quite follow the game being played. Harold finally stood, placing a $5 bill on the table. Well, I should get back to the office. Quarterly reports to review. Paul, I'll see you this afternoon. Hamilton. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Good luck with your theatrical endeavors, I'm sure it will be enlightening for everyone involved. As Harold walked away, Hamilton watched his reflection in the diner window, a man who'd gotten away with murder, walking confidently back to his stolen life, unaware that justice was finally stirring in the shadows. 2 weeks later, the Willowbrook Heights Community Center buzzed with the organized chaos of theatrical preparation. Hamilton stood on the small stage, watching Mrs. Henderson, a formidable woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and the bearing of a drill sergeant, direct the volunteer cast through their first complete run-through of the modified script. The story had evolved considerably from Mrs. Henderson's original melodrama. Working together over several late-night sessions in her book-lined living room, they'd crafted something more sophisticated, a psychological drama about two business partners, brothers by birth and rivals by nature, whose relationship sours over money and power until one resorts to murder most foul. Hamilton had been careful in his suggestions, weaving in elements that mirrored Harold's crime without being so obvious as to raise suspicions. The victim dies slowly, apparently of natural causes, while the murderer courts his brother's widow with flowers and sympathy. The poison administered gradually in the victim's favorite evening drink leaves no trace, except in the guilty conscience of the killer. "Places, everyone," Mrs. Henderson called out, her voice carrying across the community center with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We'll run through the dinner party scene once more, then move on to the death sequence." The cast, local shopkeepers, housewives, and young professionals who'd volunteered their evenings to the production took their positions on the modest set. Hamilton had helped design the stage, creating a replica of a successful businessman's study complete with leather furniture, law books, and a crystal decanter prominently displayed on the desk. Robert Walsh, who owned the town's hardware store, had agreed to play the murderous brother. At 50, he bore a passing resemblance to Harold, and Hamilton had coached him carefully on the character's mannerisms, the casual confidence, the practiced charm, the way guilt manifested in small unconscious gestures. "Remember, Robert," Hamilton called from the wings, "your character believes he's gotten away with the perfect crime. He's confident, almost cocky. But there's always that underlying nervousness, especially when anyone mentions his brother's death." Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. "Excellent direction, Hamilton. The psychology of guilt is what will make this production memorable." She clapped her hands sharply. "Now then, from the top of the scene." The actors began their dialogue, and Hamilton felt a surge of satisfaction as he watched his vision come to life. On stage, Robert Walsh poured a drink for his stage brother, adding something from a small vial while the other actor's back was turned. The movement was subtle, almost casual, but viewers who knew what to look for would catch its significance. The community center doors opened, and Hamilton's heart skipped as Harold Dane entered with Clara on his arm. His uncle had clearly dressed for the occasion, a navy blazer, pressed slacks, and his most charming smile for the other community members who'd come to support local theater. "Hamilton!" Clara waved enthusiastically from the back of the small auditorium. "We wouldn't miss your directorial debut for anything." Other neighbors and business associates filled the folding chairs. Dr. Pemberton, who'd signed Harry's death certificate, the Millers from down the street, various clients from Dane and Associates, and Mrs. Patterson, who ran the local flower shop where Harold had purchased so many sympathy bouquets. The entire power structure of Willowbrook Heights had turned out to support their community theater. Hamilton waved back, then watched Harold's face as his uncle took in the stage set. The resemblance to Harry's actual study was unmistakable. Hamilton had been careful to recreate specific details that only someone familiar with the real room would recognize. The leather chair positioned at exactly the right angle, the crystal decanter placed precisely where Harry had kept his evening brandy, even the family photograph on the desk, arranged to mirror the actual study. Harold's complexion paled as he recognized the setup, and his hand moved instinctively to his temple. But he maintained his smile, nodding appreciatively at neighbors who complimented him on his nephew's artistic endeavor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Henderson announced to the audience, "welcome to our preview performance of Brotherly Love, written and directed by our own Hamilton Dane. This is still a work in progress, so please bear with us as we refine our presentation." The audience settled into expectant silence, and Hamilton positioned himself where he could watch both the stage performance and Harold's reaction to it. This was the moment of truth. Would his uncle's guilty conscience reveal itself when confronted with a mirror image of his own crime? The play began with the two brothers in their office, discussing business expansion and family responsibilities. The dialogue was carefully crafted to echo conversations Hamilton imagined Harold and Harry might have had in the months before the murder. "You've always been the cautious one, Edward," the victim said to his brother on stage. "But sometimes in business, you have to take risks to achieve greatness." "And sometimes," Robert Walsh replied with practiced smoothness, "caution is what keeps a family business from destroying itself. Not everyone is cut out to be a leader, Thomas. Some of us are better suited to Other roles. In the audience, Harold shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Hamilton saw him lean over to whisper something to Clara. She patted his hand reassuringly, probably attributing his discomfort to grief over losing his own brother so recently. The scene progressed to the brothers' home, where the victim's wife, played by Mrs. Patterson with surprising dramatic flair, welcomed her brother-in-law for their regular evening visit. On stage, Robert Walsh's character complimented his sister-in-law's cooking, inquired about her day, and offered to help with household finances, all while maintaining the facade of devoted family loyalty. The theatrical performance continued as the stage lights dimmed to suggest the passage of time. The set had been rearranged to show the victim's study in the evening identical to Harry's actual workspace, down to the smallest detail. Hamilton watched Harold's face as recognition dawned, seeing his uncle's jaw clench when Robert Walsh's character approached the familiar crystal decanter. "Another brandy, Thomas?" the murderous brother asked on stage, his voice carrying just the right note of casual concern. "You've been working so hard lately, you need to relax." The actor playing the victim, Jim Morrison, who managed the local bank, settled into the leather chair with a grateful sigh. "You're right, Edward. Sometimes I think I push myself too hard. Maybe I should slow down, delegate more responsibility." "Delegate?" Robert Walsh's character poured the drinks with theatrical precision, his back to the audience as he added the poison. "But you've always been such a perfectionist, Thomas. You'd never trust anyone else to handle the important decisions." In the audience, Harold's breathing had become shallow and rapid. Clara noticed his distress and placed a concerned hand on his arm, whispering, "Darling, are you feeling all right? You look quite pale." "Just warm in here," Harold murmured back. But Hamilton could see the perspiration beading on his uncle's forehead despite the community center's efficient air conditioning. On stage, the brothers continued their dialogue as they sipped their evening brandies. The victim spoke of his plans for business expansion, his hopes for his son's future, his love for his wife and family. The murderer listened with apparent attention while mentally calculating dosages and timing, occasionally touching his temple in a gesture that Hamilton had specifically coached Robert Walsh to perform. "You know, Edward," the stage victim said, setting down his glass, "I've been thinking about mortality lately, about how quickly everything can change, how fragile life really is." "Have you?" The murderer's voice carried a note of barely concealed eagerness. "That's rather morbid for a successful man in his prime." "Perhaps it's the war," the victim mused. "Seeing so many young men cut down in their prime. It makes you realize that none of us know how much time we have left." Harold's hand gripped the armrest of his folding chair so tightly that his knuckles went white. Several audience members glanced his way with concern, but Hamilton kept his focus on his uncle's face, watching for the telltale signs of a guilty conscience under pressure. The scene progressed to show the gradual effects of the poison, the victim complaining of fatigue, occasional chest pains, difficulty concentrating. The family doctor, played by young Eddie Patterson from the flower shop, examined the patient and pronounced his symptoms consistent with the stresses of modern business life. "Perhaps you should consider cutting back on your responsibilities," the stage doctor suggested. "Let your brother handle more of the day-to-day operations. He seems quite capable." "Edward has been incredibly helpful," the victim agreed, while his murderous brother smiled with false modesty. "I don't know what I'd do without him." Mrs. Henderson had coached the actors well. The performances were understated, naturalistic, lacking the melodramatic flourishes typical of community theater. The poisoning scenes played out with quiet horror, showing the victim's gradual decline while his killer maintained the facade of devoted concern. As the play approached its climax, Hamilton noticed Harold's increasing agitation. His uncle's hand moved constantly to his temple now, and he'd begun shifting in his seat as if the folding chair had become unbearably uncomfortable. At one point, he started to stand as if to leave, but Clara's gentle pressure on his arm kept him in place. "Almost over, darling," she whispered. "Hamilton has worked so hard on this production." The final scene showed the victim's death, a peaceful collapse in his study while reviewing business papers, his evening brandy glass empty beside him. The murderous brother's discovery of the body was masterfully played, with Robert Walsh displaying just the right combination of shock, grief, and barely concealed relief. "Thomas! My God, Thomas!" the killer cried out, cradling his brother's lifeless form. But Hamilton had coached the actor to let a fleeting smile cross his face, When he thought no one was looking, a moment of triumph quickly suppressed beneath a mask of devastation. Harold made a strangled sound in the audience, half gasp and half sob, causing several heads to turn in his direction. Clara squeezed his hand sympathetically, tears in her own eyes at what she perceived as her husband's grief over his brother's recent death being triggered by the dramatic performance. The play concluded with the murderer inheriting everything, the business, the house, even courting his victim's widow with the same patience he'd used to administer poison. The final image was of the killer standing in the victim's study, now his own, raising a toast to his absent brother, while the lighting suggested the ghostly presence of the murdered man watching from the shadows. As the curtain fell and polite applause filled the community center, Harold bolted from his seat and rushed toward the exit, his face ashen and his breathing labored. Clara hurried after him, calling his name with concern, while other audience members murmured among themselves about his dramatic reaction. Hamilton stepped onto the stage to take his bow, but his eyes remained fixed on the doorway where his uncle had disappeared. The trap had been sprung, and Harold's violent reaction had been witnessed by half the community leadership of Willowbrook Heights. Mrs. Henderson joined Hamilton at center stage, beaming with pride at their production's impact. "Well done, my boy," she said under her breath. "I've never seen community theater provoke such a powerful emotional response." Outside the Willowbrook Heights Community Center, the summer evening air hung thick with humidity and the scent of honeysuckle from the landscaped gardens. Harold stood beside his gleaming black Cadillac, loosening his tie with shaking hands while Clara rubbed his back in small soothing circles. "Breathe, darling," she murmured, her voice filled with wifely concern. "It's all right. It was just a play. Just actors pretending." But Harold's chest continued to heave as if he'd run a great distance, and his face remained the color of old newspaper. Other audience members filed past them on their way to their own automobiles, many casting curious glances at the visibly distressed businessman who'd fled the performance so dramatically. Dr. Pemberton approached with his medical bag in hand, his expression professionally concerned. "Harold, I saw you rush out. Are you having chest pains? Difficulty breathing?" "I'm fine," Harold managed, though his voice came out as a hoarse whisper. Just needed some air." The performance was quite realistic. "Perhaps too realistic," Dr. Pemberton observed, studying Harold's pallor with a physician's trained eye. "Given your recent loss, it's understandable that a play about family tragedy would affect you deeply. Grief manifests in many ways." Hamilton emerged from the community center surrounded by well-wishers congratulating him on his directorial debut. Mrs. Patterson complimented the authentic period details, while Jim Morrison praised the psychological complexity of the script. But Hamilton's attention was fixed on the tableau beside the Cadillac, his uncle fighting to regain composure, while his mother provided comfort for what she believed was triggered grief. "Excellent work, young man," said Judge Matthews, the elderly patriarch who presided over Willowbrook Heights' social hierarchy. "Quite provocative theater. I haven't seen a community performance generate such emotional response since Mrs. Henderson directed Death of a Salesman 5 years ago." "Thank you, sir," Hamilton replied, accepting congratulations while keeping Harold in his peripheral vision. "I believe theater should hold up a mirror to life, even when what we see isn't entirely comfortable." Mrs. Miller, their next-door neighbor, lingered as the crowd began to disperse. "Your uncle certainly seemed moved by the performance," she observed, with the careful neutrality of a woman who'd witnessed something significant but wasn't quite sure what she'd seen. Such a powerful reaction. The play must have reminded him of his dear brother. "I'm sure it did," Hamilton agreed, noting how several community members were still glancing toward Harold with curiosity and concern. His uncle's dramatic exit hadn't gone unnoticed, and in a close-knit suburb where everyone knew everyone else's business, unusual behavior became the subject of coffee shop conversations and backyard gossip. Paul Landis appeared at Hamilton's elbow, his face troubled. "Ham, I think you should know Mr. Dane was really upset during the performance. More than just emotional. He kept muttering things under his breath, stuff about it being too accurate and how could they know." Clara couldn't calm him down. Hamilton's pulse quickened. Harold's reaction had been even more revealing than he'd hoped. Did anyone else hear him? Mrs. Henderson did. She was sitting right behind them. Paul lowered his voice further. "She asked me afterward if you'd based the play on some real case, because Harold's reaction seemed so personal. Across the parking lot, Dr. Pemberton was helping Harold into the passenger seat of the Cadillac, while Clara took the keys to drive them home. Even from a distance, Hamilton could see his uncle's hands trembling as he struggled with his seatbelt. "I should go check on them," Hamilton announced loudly enough for nearby listeners to hear. "Family duty. You understand." He approached the car just as Clara was adjusting the rearview mirror. Her own face creased with worry. "Hamilton! Thank goodness. Could you follow us home?" "I don't think Harold should be alone tonight. The place seems to have triggered something, grief maybe, or memories of your father." Through the passenger window, Harold's eyes met Hamilton's, and for a moment, the mask of respectability slipped entirely. Hamilton saw raw terror in his uncle's gaze, the fear of a man whose deepest secret had been exposed under bright lights before an audience of his peers. "Of course, Mother," Hamilton said, his voice warm with false concern. "Family should stick together during difficult times." Harold's lips moved silently, and Hamilton could just make out the word "bastard" before Clara started the engine and pulled away from the community center. The drive through Willowbrook Heights' tree-lined streets felt like a funeral procession in reverse instead of mourning someone's death. They were traveling toward the resurrection of terrible truths that had been buried beneath suburban propriety and forced amnesia. Porch lights glowed warmly in windows, where families gathered around television sets and dinner tables, unaware that their community's facade of perfection was beginning to crack. At the Tudor mansion on Elm Street, Hamilton helped Clara guide Harold into the house and settle him in the living room with a brandy-ironic choice of medicinal alcohol, given what they'd just witnessed on stage. Harold's hands still shook as he raised the glass to his lips, and Hamilton wondered if his uncle was thinking about all the times he'd served poison in similar glasses to his brother. "I'll stay downstairs tonight," Hamilton announced. "Keep an eye on things. Make sure Uncle Harold is all right." Clara looked relieved. "That would be wonderful, dear. I hate seeing him like this. He's been under so much stress with the business and our new marriage. Sometimes I think the guilt is eating him alive." Both Hamilton and Harold froze at her choice of words, though Clara continued chattering, oblivious to the double meaning in what she'd said. "Guilt?" Hamilton asked carefully. "Survivor's guilt, Dr. Pemberton calls it. Harold keeps saying he should have done more to help your father, should have insisted he see a specialist about his heart condition. He blames himself for not preventing Harry's death." Clara brushed tears from her eyes. "Such a sensitive man. Too sensitive, perhaps." Harold's brandy glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor and sending amber liquid splashing across the Persian rug. He stared at the broken crystal with the expression of a man watching his entire world fragment beyond repair. I'll clean that up," he whispered, starting to rise from his chair. "No," Hamilton said firmly, placing a hand on his uncle's shoulder. The contact made Harold flinch as if he'd been burned. "You rest, Uncle Harold. I'll take care of everything. After all, that's what family does, we clean up each other's messes." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Harold's face went even paler as he recognized the threat beneath his nephew's solicitous tone. The grandfather clock in the Dane family living room chimed midnight, its bronze notes echoing through the Tudor mansion like a death knell. Hamilton sat in his father's old reading chair, watching Harold pace the length of the Persian rug with the restless energy of a caged animal. Clara had retired to bed an hour ago, leaving the two men alone with their shared knowledge and mutual hatred. Harold had removed his jacket and loosened his tie, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled for the first time since Hamilton had returned from Korea. Perspiration stained his white shirt despite the house's central air conditioning, and his silver hair hung limply across his forehead, where nervous fingers had raked through it repeatedly. "Clever," Harold finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Very clever, nephew. I underestimated you." Hamilton remained motionless in the leather chair, studying his uncle with the patient attention of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "Did you really think you could murder my father and get away with it? That I wouldn't notice? That no one would ask questions?" Harold stopped pacing and fixed Hamilton with bloodshot eyes. "Your father died of natural causes. Heart failure. Dr. Pemberton signed the death certificate. There was no murder. No conspiracy, just a middle-aged man who worked too hard and ignored the warning signs." "Is that what you tell yourself at night?" Hamilton stood slowly, his military bearing making him appear taller, more dangerous. When you're lying next to my mother in the bed that used to be my parents'? Do you sleep peacefully, Uncle Harold, or do you dream about poison?" Harold's hand flew to his temple. The tell had become so pronounced that he no longer tried to hide it. "You're having delusions, Hamilton. The war damaged you more than we realized. You need help. Professional help." "The only thing the war taught me was how to recognize the enemy," Hamilton replied, moving closer. "And you're definitely the enemy, Harold. You're a murderer who stole my father's life, his business, his wife. You're wearing his clothes, sleeping in his bed, spending his money, but you can never be him." "I loved your mother long before your father married her," Harold said, his voice cracking with emotion that might have been genuine. "We were childhood sweethearts, did you know that? Harry stole her from me when we were young, just like he stole everything else. The business, our parents' respect, the life that should have been mine." The confession hung between them like smoke from a funeral pyre. Harold seemed to realize what he'd revealed, his face going pale as he recognized the trap he'd walked into. "So you decided to take it all back," Hamilton said softly, "even if it meant murder." Harold collapsed into the opposite chair, suddenly looking every one of his 45 years and more. "It wasn't supposed to be murder. I wanted him to suffer a little. To understand what it felt like to lose something precious. The digitalis was supposed to make him sick, weaken him, force him to rely on me more. But it went too far. His heart was weaker than I thought, the dosage that should have made him ill." Harold buried his face in his hands. "I never meant for him to die, Hamilton. You have to believe that. It was an accident, a miscalculation." Hamilton felt a cold satisfaction at finally hearing the truth, but it was tempered by disgust at his uncle's attempts at self-justification. "An accident that lasted weeks. An accident that you covered up by courting my mother at his funeral. An accident that you've profited from every day since." Harold looked up with desperate eyes. "What do you want from me? Money? The business? I'll give you anything, just don't destroy your mother with this. She's happy now, Hamilton. Happier than she's been in years. Do you really want to rip that away from her?" The question struck at Hamilton's deepest fear, that seeking justice for his father would destroy his mother's newfound peace. Clara had bloomed again since marrying Harold, regaining the vitality and joy that widowhood had temporarily stolen. Learning that her new husband had murdered her first would shatter something essential in her spirit. "She deserves to know the truth," Hamilton said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Does she?" Harold leaned forward, sensing weakness. What good would it do? Harry's dead either way. Knowing won't bring him back. It will only destroy Clara and ruin 3 lives instead of 1. Hamilton moved to the French doors that led to the garden where his father's ghost had first appeared. Outside, the summer night was alive with crickets and fireflies, the natural world continuing its ancient rhythms oblivious to human drama and suburban secrets. "Where is it?" he asked without turning around. "Where is what?" "The digitalis. The poison you used. I know you kept some, killers always do. It's like a trophy, proof of what they accomplished." Harold was quiet for so long that Hamilton began to think he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely audible above the grandfather clock's ticking, he said, "In my office at home. Hidden behind the medical books in my desk drawer." Hamilton turned back to face his uncle, noting the complete defeat in Harold's posture. "You're going to show me. Tonight. And then? Then you're going to confess. To the police, to Dr. Pemberton, to everyone who needs to hear it. You're going to face justice for what you did." Harold's laugh was bitter, broken. "Justice? In Willowbrook Heights? Do you really think they'll believe a war veteran with shell shock over a respected businessman? Do you think they'll want to believe it? Murder doesn't happen in places like this, Hamilton. We're too civilized, too successful, too normal." But Hamilton had seen the community's reaction to Harold's breakdown at the theater. Doubt had been planted, questions had been raised. The perfect facade of suburban respectability was already beginning to crack. "We'll see," Hamilton said. "Get your keys, Uncle Harold. We're going to settle this tonight." Harold's hands trembled as he unlocked the front door of his own house. A modest colonial, just 3 blocks from the Tudor mansion. Close enough to his brother's family to maintain the appearance of devoted kinship, far enough away to conduct his murderous business in private. The house stood dark and silent at 2 in the morning, its windows reflecting the streetlights like empty eyes watching their approach. Hamilton followed his uncle through the front hall, past family photographs that now seemed like evidence of a carefully constructed lie. There was Harold at various community events, church picnics, country club gatherings, Rotary Club meetings, always smiling, always respectable, always playing the role of the solid citizen while plotting his brother's death. The home office occupied a small room at the back of the house, lined with medical and legal texts that Harold had collected to support his insurance work. The desk was mahogany, smaller than Harry's but positioned to catch the morning light from a window that overlooked a garden where Harold grew prize-winning roses, flowers that required careful attention to soil chemistry, to the precise balance of nutrients and toxins that determined whether they flourished or withered. "The drawer sticks," Harold said, his voice hollow as he fumbled with the desk's lower compartment. "You have to know exactly how to—" The drawer slid open with a reluctant squeal, revealing neat rows of files, office supplies, and several medical reference books. Harold reached behind the volumes with the practiced motion of someone who'd performed this ritual many times before, withdrawing a small brown bottle with a pharmaceutical label. Hamilton took the bottle carefully, reading the prescription details by lamplight. Digitalis purpurea extract, prescribed to Harold himself for heart palpitations by a doctor in the next county, someone who wouldn't know the Dane family history, wouldn't ask awkward questions about why Harry's brother suddenly needed cardiac medication. "How much did you give him?" Hamilton asked, noting that nearly half the contents were gone. 2 milligrams at first, dissolved in his evening brandy. Just enough to cause mild symptoms: fatigue, slight chest discomfort. I told myself I was just making him slow down, force him to delegate more responsibility. Harold's confession came in a rush now, as if holding the secret had become unbearable. But the symptoms weren't dramatic enough. He still went to work, still made decisions, still acted like the successful businessman everyone admired. Hamilton felt sick listening to the clinical details of his father's murder, the way Harold described increasing the dosage like a chemist adjusting a formula. "So you gave him more." 4 milligrams, then 6. I researched the therapeutic window, the difference between medicinal and toxic levels. I thought I was being careful, scientific. Harold slumped in his desk chair, a broken man finally facing the magnitude of his crimes. But Harry's heart was more damaged than I realized, probably from his war service. All that stress and poor nutrition in the Pacific. What should have made him sick killed him instead. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 2:30. And Hamilton wondered if his father's ghost was listening to this confession, finally hearing the truth about his own murder spoken aloud in the house of his killer. "You could have stopped," Hamilton said. "When you saw he was getting sicker, when the symptoms became severe, you could have reduced the dose, called a doctor, saved his life." Harold's laugh was bitter and self-loathing. "Could I? By then I'd already started courting Clara. Already begun positioning myself as the devoted brother who'd step up to help the family. Backing down would have meant admitting I'd been poisoning him, would have raised questions I couldn't answer." Hamilton moved to the window, looking out at Harold's carefully tended garden, where roses bloomed in perfect rows under the streetlights. Everything about his uncle's life was controlled, cultivated, designed to project success and respectability while concealing the rot beneath. "What about Mother?" Hamilton asked. "Did she ever suspect?" Clara saw what she wanted to see, a grieving widow being comforted by a devoted brother-in-law. "She was so grateful for my help with the funeral arrangements, the business details, the legal paperwork. I made myself indispensable to her grief." Harold's voice carried a note of bitter pride. "I knew her better than Harry ever did. I understood that she needed structure, stability, someone to make decisions while she mourned. I gave her exactly what she needed when she needed it most." The calculation behind the courtship was almost more disturbing than the murder itself, the way Harold had studied his sister-in-law's emotional needs and exploited them with the same precision he'd used to administer poison. Every flower, every sympathetic word, every helpful gesture had been part of a campaign to win the ultimate prize. "She'll never forgive me when she learns the truth," Harold continued, staring at the digitalis bottle in Hamilton's hands. "The betrayal will destroy her trust in everyone, in everything. She'll question every memory, every moment of happiness we've shared. It would be kinder to let her keep believing in the lie." Hamilton turned back from the window, his jaw set with military determination. "That's not your choice to make anymore, Uncle Harold. You forfeited the right to make decisions about Mother's life when you murdered her first husband. Harold stood slowly, his shoulders bowed with defeat. What happens now? Do we call the police? Wake up the neighbors with sirens and handcuffs? Turn Willowbrook Heights into a crime scene? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Hamilton had achieved his goal. He had proof of the murder, a confession from the killer, justice within his grasp. But the cost would be enormous. His mother's shattered happiness, the community's loss of innocence, the destruction of everything that made Willowbrook Heights feel safe and civilized. Outside, a police car made its regular patrol down the quiet street, the officer probably thinking about coffee and the end of his shift, unaware that inside one of those respectable colonial houses, a murderer was waiting to be arrested. Hamilton pocketed the digitalis bottle and moved toward the office door. We're going back to the house, Uncle Harold. We're going to wake up Mother and tell her everything. She deserves to hear the truth from us, before she hears it from the police. Harold followed like a condemned man walking to his execution, each step taking him closer to the end of the life he'd built on his brother's grave. Behind them, the office stood empty, its secrets finally exposed to the unforgiving light of truth. The Tudor mansion on Elm Street stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, its windows dark except for a single light burning in the master bedroom where Clara had left a lamp on for her husband's return. Hamilton and Harold walked up the flagstone path like mourners approaching a funeral, which, in a way, they were. The life Clara had built with Harold was about to die, sacrificed on the altar of truth and justice. Inside, the familiar scents of lemon polish and Clara's Chanel perfume seemed to mock the gravity of what was about to unfold. This house had been Hamilton's childhood sanctuary, filled with birthday parties and Christmas mornings, family dinners and quiet evenings by the fireplace. Now, it would become the site of revelation and reckoning. Harold moved through the rooms like a ghost himself, touching familiar objects with the reverence of a man saying goodbye. At the foot of the staircase, he paused, one hand on the mahogany banister that had been polished to a mirror shine. "Let me do it," he said quietly. "Let me tell her. She should hear it from her husband, not from you." Hamilton studied his uncle's haggard face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But Harold's eyes held only resignation and a genuine desire to spare Clara additional pain. Even in confession, he was trying to protect the woman he'd claimed to love. "We'll tell her together," Hamilton decided. "She deserves to hear the complete truth, not some sanitized version designed to make you look better." They climbed the stairs in silence, their footsteps muffled by the thick Persian runner. The second-floor hallway stretched before them like a path to judgment, lined with family photographs that chronicled happier times: Harry and Clara's wedding, Hamilton's graduation from high school, various holidays and anniversaries that now seemed like artifacts from an innocent world that no longer existed. Clara's bedroom door was slightly ajar, and they could hear her gentle breathing from within. Harold hesitated at the threshold, his hand trembling as he reached for the doorknob. "Clara?" he called softly. "Darling, I need to talk to you." The bedside lamp clicked on, and Clara sat up in confusion, her hair mussed from sleep, her silk nightgown the color of pale roses. She blinked in the sudden light, trying to process why both her husband and stepson were standing in her doorway at 3 a.m. "Harold? Hamilton? What's wrong? Is someone hurt?" Her voice carried the immediate concern of a woman accustomed to midnight emergencies and family crises. Harold entered the room first, moving to sit on the edge of the bed, while Hamilton remained by the door like a sentinel guarding against escape. Clara looked back and forth between them, her intuition beginning to sense that whatever had brought them here was far more serious than she'd initially thought. "There's something I need to tell you," Harold began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something about Harry's death, about how I." Clara's face went pale as understanding began to dawn. She'd lived through enough family tragedy to recognize the look of someone preparing to deliver devastating news. Her hands clutched the bedsheets like anchors in a storm she could feel approaching. "What about Harry's death?" she asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Hamilton stepped forward, the digitalis bottle visible in his hand. "Mother, Uncle Harold has been lying to you. About everything. Dad didn't die of natural causes." The words hung in the perfumed air of the bedroom like poison themselves, contaminating everything they touched. Clara stared at the bottle in Hamilton's hand, her expression shifting from confusion to horror as the implications became clear. "No," she whispered. "No, that's impossible. Harold loved Harry. They were brothers. The doctor said it was his heart. I poisoned him." Harold's confession came out in a rush, as if he couldn't bear to prolong her agony. "I gave him digitalis in his evening brandy. A little at a time, over several weeks. I never meant for him to die, Clara. I just wanted him to be sick, to need me, to give me a chance to prove I could run the business better." Clara's scream pierced the quiet house like breaking glass. She recoiled from Harold as if he'd suddenly become a venomous snake, pressing herself against the headboard with eyes wide with terror and betrayal. "You killed him? You killed Harry?" Her voice rose to a hysterical pitch. "While I was thanking God for having such a devoted brother-in-law, while I was grateful for your comfort and support, you were the one who murdered my husband?" Harold reached toward her, tears streaming down his face. "Clara, please let me explain." "Don't touch me." She scrambled away from him, falling off the bed in her haste to escape his presence. "Don't you dare touch me with the hands that killed him." The sound of Clara's anguish filled the house like a living thing, echoing off the walls and windows of rooms that had once sheltered a happy family. Hamilton watched his mother's world collapse in real time, seeing the exact moment when her trust in everything she'd believed was shattered beyond repair. "How long?" she demanded, backing against the bedroom wall, as if trying to disappear into it. "How long were you planning this? How long were you courting me while murdering him?" Harold slumped forward, his face buried in his hands. "Months. I'd been giving him small doses for months before he died. And I'd been watching you, Clara. Learning your routines, your needs, preparing to step in when you'd made me a widow." The words came out flat, dead, as if emotion had been burned out of her entirely. "You created the tragedy you swooped in to solve. You murdered my husband so you could comfort his widow." The grandfather clock downstairs chimed 4 o'clock, and somewhere in the distance, a milk truck began its morning route. Normal life was continuing in Willowbrook Heights, while their world ended in a bedroom filled with accusations and broken promises. Clara looked at Hamilton with desperate eyes. "How long have you known? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Hamilton felt the weight of his own deceptions pressing down on him. "Dad's ghost told me. The night of the wedding. I've been trying to find proof, trying to make sure before I—" "Ghost?" Clara's laugh was bitter, edged with hysteria. "My dead husband had to come back from the grave to tell his son that his brother was a murderer? What kind of family have we become?" Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they approached Elm Street. Hamilton had called them from Harold's house while his uncle confessed, knowing that private justice would never be enough. The law needed to be involved, even if it destroyed everything they'd once held sacred. Harold stood slowly, straightening his shoulders with the dignity of a condemned man facing his execution. "I'll go with them quietly, Clara. I won't fight this. I deserve whatever punishment they give me." Clara stood against the bedroom wall, her silk nightgown torn where she'd fallen, her face streaked with tears and mascara. She looked like a broken doll, beautiful but irreparably damaged. "Get out," she whispered. "Both of you, get out of my sight." The police cars pulled into the circular driveway, their red and blue lights painting the Tudor mansion in colors of crime and consequence. Harold walked downstairs to meet them, while Hamilton lingered in the hallway, watching his mother collapse into her grief. Justice had been served, his father's ghost could rest in peace, and the truth had finally been revealed. But as Hamilton watched the police lead Harold away in handcuffs while neighbors gathered on their porches to witness the fall of Willowbrook Heights' most respected family, he wondered if the price of justice had been too high. The American dream lay shattered on Elm Street, and the suburbs would never feel quite as safe again.